Good morning. It's Sunday, October the 12th. When the Founding Fathers declared independence and embarked on the mission of building a new nation in 1776, they sought to create a form of government that would be protected from the kind of tyranny they experienced under British rule. They wanted the colonies, soon to become the states, to be sovereign and able to govern themselves. They didn't want America to have a centralized government that consolidated all of the power in the country. So when they drafted the Articles of Confederation, they established a so-called confederal government. It vested most of the power to individual state legislatures, and it created a relatively weak national government that couldn't really do anything other than declare war and sign treaties. But the states weren't exactly united. Instead, as the Articles of Confederation put it, they had entered into a, quote, League of Friendship. That initial form of government didn't really work out. It created an unstable political environment. It saddled the country with crippling debt that led to a depression. So in 1787, each state sent delegates to Independence Hall in Philadelphia to reform the government. We now refer to that meeting, one of the most important gatherings in American history, as the Constitutional Convention. That convention resulted in the creation of the Constitution of the United States. The drafters of the Constitution realized that the country needed a new form of government built upon the idea that power must be balanced between different levels of government and responsibilities must be shared. So they preserved the states' ability to govern themselves, but they also established a slightly stronger federal government than what the country previously had, one that could defend the interests of the nation as a whole and maintain a consistency across the land. That division of power is known as federalism. That term, federalism, doesn't appear a single time in the Constitution, but it is the core principle of the American government embodied in the Constitution itself. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lays out what powers are set aside for Congress, like maintaining an army, declaring war, collecting taxes, coining money, regulating commerce, and so on. The 10th Amendment, the final amendment that was included in the Bill of Rights, ensures that states maintained their sovereignty and allowed them to maintain their jurisdictions as they saw fit. Quote, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, end quote. So in order to get the Constitution ratified, particularly in the state of New York, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote a series of essays explaining why this document and this form of government would be better for the country. That series of essays, now known as the Federalist Papers, remain one of the most important and most cited documents in constitutional law. In one essay, Federalist Paper number 47, Madison explains why the division of powers is so important to this new nation. Quote, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. The power dynamics between the states and the federal government have fluctuated over time, shaped by the needs of the nation, by Supreme Court rulings, and other external forces. Currently, though, we're witnessing an attempt by Donald Trump's administration to use the levers of the federal government to impose its ideology upon all of the states. We're seeing this in a variety of ways, as sharp partisan policy divides have emerged on issues ranging from abortion to immigration to voting rights. This administration has pulled funds or threatened to pull funds from states that don't follow its directives on DEI and so-called woke programs. And Trump's campaign of retribution has repeatedly targeted Democratic-led states and their liberal ideologies. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance have also played active roles in convincing states like Texas to redraw their congressional maps in the middle of the decade, something that's solely the responsibility of the states. We're also seeing the president clash more and more with Democratic governors, most recently in his multiple attempts to federalize and deploy the National Guard in Democratic-led cities. Federalism is supposed to promote a system of government where a diversity of ideologies can flourish and in which each state can govern their jurisdiction as they see fit. This administration isn't just trying to usurp powers from the states. It's actively trying to consolidate those powers within the executive branch. Joining me now is Zach Beecham. He's a senior correspondent at Vox. He's the author of The Reactionary Spirit, How America's Most Insidious Political Traditions Swept the World. Zach, welcome back to the show. Let's talk about a few of these examples. In Oklahoma, Governor Kevin Stitt, who's a Republican and happens to be the chair of the National Governors Association, criticized the plan to deploy the Texas National Guard into Illinois during an interview with the New York Times on Thursday. And in his criticism, he invoked the principle of federalism. He said, quote, "We believe in the federalist system, that states' rights. Oklahomans would lose their mind if Pritzker in Illinois sent troops down to Oklahoma during the Biden administration." Zach, states' rights used to be a Republican rallying cry. Other than Stitt, most Republican governors have forgotten about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right, where it seems that a lot of people's positions change based on whatever is convenient in the political moment, right? So sometimes you support an activist court that's making up new legal principles because they're favorable to your preferred policy outcomes. Sometimes you prefer federalism because states' rights are useful for protecting you from a federal government controlled by the other party, right? There's a lot of opportunism, and this happens, I think, to a real degree on both sides. This isn't just a Republican thing. Yeah, everyone's a little hypocritical when it comes to issues of principled power like this. I think what the Trump stuff revealed, and Stitt's comment is especially meaningful here, is that Trump has gone way beyond what anyone previously considered reasonable or even remotely possible, right? Like the idea that you could be essentially occupying states using another state's National Guard, right, against the will of the local authorities, deploying them troops to their city to try to usurp law enforcement powers. I mean, that's so far beyond what was conceivable, even in these sort of hypocritical power exchange things, that's anyone who's remotely honest about this, like Stitt is, which I think very impressively so, indicates just like how far off the rails we've gone when it comes to basic constitutional design.
And Stitt's talking about the military, which is its own category of problem. But Texas Governor Greg Abbott, I mean, Texas has been a home rule state, although we learned during COVID it wasn't so much because they didn't like their municipalities making rules that were not what the state did. But Texas Governor Greg Abbott has been a willing partner with Donald Trump in this, including with the legislature agreeing to a special session to redraw Texas's congressional maps. I mean, this is not the purview of the federal government under any circumstance.
No. It's just, I mean, it's very straightforward here, right? Like what is happening is an effort, and sort of to take a step back, right? Like if you look at the U.S. in comparative perspective, like looking at other countries that have had similar leaders like Trump, say a Hungary or an Israel or a Poland or Venezuela, one of the things that like stands out really clearly as distinct in the U.S. is the federal system. And so a lot of very knowledgeable scholars would say it would be extremely difficult to do something like replicate the Hungarian system in the United States because it relies on centralized federal control, right? On national control over elections, national control over policing functions, over regulatory functions, many of which were under the U.S. system delegated down to the states, creating a significant bulwark, right? It's a lot harder for Trump to mess with, say, Hollywood because California is a blue state, or Wall Street because New York is also a blue state, right? So there are certain things that are done locally that he can't deal with. And yet, right, these efforts to try to insinuate federal control in areas where it's not supposed to be operating is sort of breaking down this really important barrier that we have against a truly authoritarian government.
You make an interesting point that this has been going on for a long time, but we associate it with different things. We think of the consolidation of executive power, which happened under Obama and Bush. It's been going on for a long time. Now we talk about the erosion of the administrative state, but very much like the Constitution, which, until a few years ago, many Americans didn't bother to read, and now it becomes really relevant because of all the constitutional crises that we deal with. That's the issue with federalism, right? I can't, if I go out on the street and ask 10 people whether they read the Federalist Papers, I think I'll get a response of 0. But this issue of federalism now becomes newly important because we've seen how when you stretch the bounds of this, you run into trouble.
That's right. It's one of those things that in normal times, I get the certain push and pull of charges of hypocrisy on both sides, and those charges being and feeling, very apt. Honestly, it is the case that people would often opportunistically switch their positions on whether or not there's a matter of principle or states' rights at stake, depending on whether or not it would favor their preferred policy outcome, right? I said that at the beginning. I really think that's true. But as you point out, right, when people are reading the Constitution or worrying about the basic architecture of the federal system, or honestly, like paying attention to people like me, my wife is a joke that what's bad for the country is good for you because I study comparative authoritarianism. And like, look what's bad, right? Like that's when people want to listen to what I have to say. And like all of these things become more important and worse, right? And serious when there's an actual infringement beyond, sort of basic normal times politics into like attacks on the basic design of the system, not just a dispute at the margin. Should a state have X particular power? Is that federal? But over the very idea of whether the federal government should be exercising essentially untrammeled and unlimited control over the states without any restrictions, which is when you shatter some of these rules as thoroughly as Trump has, that's just an unprincipled breaking of the system, right? It's not tweaking it at its edges. It's not contestation over the limits of something. It's just straight up, I can do what I want and you have to deal with it unless you can stop me.
Yeah, because you can read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and say, you know what, that's obscure and that was for that time. This is not a tweaking for our time. This is an actual redesigning of what we thought our government should be. Zach, I'm glad that tough times are good for you because you and I get to have a lot of conversations and our viewers get to be a lot smarter as a result. Zach Beecham is the senior correspondent at Vox. He's the author of The Reactionary Spirit: How America's Most Insidious Political Tradition Swept the World.